As a student in your formative years, when you have two major bodies who play a major part in your life, schools and parents teaching you conflicting beliefs, we think that that's extremely detrimental to the child's mindset into making rational decisions that matter in his life or her life in the future. What is side government going to fight for you today? There are three things we're fighting for. Number one, we're okay with ideas of religion. We're okay with ideas of atheism and other political views that you have as an individual. The very idea that you live in a democratic nation proves to you that you have the right into making the choice of what kind of beliefs you want to opt in for, what kind of education who teaches you these kinds of thoughts that helps your thought process in formative years itself. We think it is extremely important you make the right decision, especially in your formative years. Number two, what we're not okay it is when you constantly sit down, force conflicting thoughts and conflicting educations from schools itself. We give you examples when you're a Christian, when you believe in creationism. But schools are constantly teaching you that no, humans comes from evolution itself. Humans comes from protons that actually merge together, right? We think that these are the certain forms of conflicting beliefs we do not want in education. Number three, we think that parents can have the ability to opt out from the education their child is going for. They must prove why so. Sit down. Let's take a look at the two arguments that government is proposing for you today. Number one, why is it so necessary and so important that parents are given this opt-out system? And number two, why personal life should be removed from education.
Would you allow parents to take the children out of school because they have a choice over their child?
Yeah, no, right? Look, we think that in educations, schools are there to educate about what they are supposed to learn. And we think that in a democratic nation itself, when you have your own rights to choose what you are supposed to believe, you cannot coerce and you cannot force upon a particular thought or a particular education that is conflicting with your own personal beliefs. First argument, three levels for you today. Number one, what are the natures of education, especially in formative years? What are formative years, right? We think formative years are the most important years where every single thing you learn is so hard to be reversed in the future. For example, formative years are when you are still in schools, right? When you are taught that Christianity is the way of life. Even when you grow up and you live in a society, sit down, where vast majorities are atheists, the very fact that Christianity is the way of life being taught to you in your formative years is hard to reverse in the future. Number two, what is education? We think that education in schools in status quo, sit down, education is also something like formative years, right? For example, if you are taught science, that humans comes from evolution, you cannot say no to it. This is extremely detrimental to the rational calculus of the child in the future. Second level, why education is the most effective when free from conflicting beliefs, right? Look, you cannot force a staunch Christian or a conservative Christian that humans comes from evolution, because in their years, in their young years, they have been taught throughout their whole life that Christianity is the way of life. God created humans. You can never force science and evolution upon Christians, right? We think that when you have education, such a major part of your life, having conflicting beliefs with what you have learned in the past, where parents and family taught you about, we think that's extremely detrimental, right? Because it results in effective learning. So when you have a thought coming from A and you have a thought coming from B, we think when these two thoughts conflicts and you can never ever find a way to break the tie, you can never find the real truth or what you're looking for, we think that that's when you affect the rational calculus of the child itself. But number three, why it prevents parents from going underground, right? Look, we think that in status quo, US itself, sit down, there's a growing interest of parents sending their kids to homeschools. Why is this so? It's because that schools do not allow parents to opt out their children from the conflicting beliefs that they are actually learning. We think that this is we think that this is exclusively detrimental to the parents and also to also to citizens of the state itself, is because when children are not being sent to schools, states no longer have the liability or have control over what they are learning really. We think that this is a loophole for bad syllabus to come into homeschools. And even when the education that these students are getting from homeschools are bad and ineffective, we think that states no longer have access to control and regulate that harmful education. We think that this is extremely detrimental to the child's learning process. Second argument, why should personal life be removed from education? Two levels under this. Number one, how religion or political views are externalities, right? We think that in your formative years, in the whole long life that you've been living before you enter this school, you've been taught a particular ideology. We think that people, students, parents look up to schools as a body that is able to educate their child into sufficient education that can benefit them in the future. But when you have conflicting ideas and you are not allowed to opt out from it, we think that that's extremely detrimental. You affect the rational calculus of that that particular student itself. Number two, why status quo causes a reaction of distrust of distrust with schools, right? And how is that so detrimental? Is that when parents do not trust schools already because they think that schools are not doing sufficiently enough for their kids, for them to be successful people in the future. We think that's when there's the bad cooperation between parents and teachers itself. Because when parents do not acknowledge what their child is learning in schools, that's when they do not take part into the learning progress is going through in their schools already. We think that no matter what the child learns and learns or is being taught in school, the child cannot absorb what he's being taught by the teacher. And we think it is extremely detrimental when parents can no longer take a part into the education and progression of that particular kid itself, because there's no cooperation between the state schools and parents already. We think that if you go for children that are able to grow up properly, not being hindered of basic education and their personal beliefs, we think you go with side opening government.
Yeah, wait. Let me just try. Where's the aircon?
What?
Clearly, that's not the aircon.
Huh?
Not here.
Yeah.
It's for your debate at most.
Okay, so leader proposition. So today you can make the speech now. Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, lessons taught in schools are not inherently bad. This is what both sides of the House have to consider, right? Because regardless of whatever reason parents might have, we tell you that there is always a fundamental good in learning a subject, and that's why it's placed in school, right? So today, we have two characterizations for you. Firstly, on how schools are meant to be holistic forms of education. They teach you PE, like for example, if they teach you physical education, it's because they want you to be fit, right? So we tell you that there is always a fundamental good in it, even though that some parents may not agree with it, right? And secondly, if parents think that the education system is not good enough, we are always open to changing it. But this is not mainly what the debate is about, right? Because today's debate is it's all about whether we should give them the right to pull their child out of certain subjects, right? So before that, let me go into a few clarifications, right? Firstly, they talked about how when you give, for example, a religious child, when you put a religious child in a subject, for example, like which teaches atheism and all that, right? They say that there is conflicting information in the child since they are young, and it's their major time of growth, right? We tell you that isn't it better when they are able to understand the picture of both sides of atheism and of religion when they are younger, right? We tell you this paints a better picture to them, because even though, I mean, especially if the children are in a religious family, right, they will always think that things not in line with their religion are inherently bad. For example, atheism and all that. So today I have 3 substances for you. Firstly, on why you remove the ability of schools to give children the most the optimal form of education. Secondly, on how there is a counter narrative within otherwise indoctrinated societies. And thirdly, on how we cannot remove one subject because only a certain part of it is deemed bad by certain parents, right? So firstly, on why you remove the ability of schools to give children the most optimal form of education. Firstly, this debate is not about parents who don't care. All right, we tell you, this debate is mainly specifically about parents who want their children to only learn specific subjects which we are in line with their principles of religion and all that, right? So mainly in homes, right, parents can be very controlling. They tell you to do this because it's good for you, and the children have to follow because it's their parents, right? And they don't usually go against that, right? We tell that school, what is the duty of a school, first of all? Is to educate the child in the best way possible, to give them the best holistic form of education, to give them the best things they need in life to be able to succeed in life, right? So we tell you that school is the only platform. School is the only place for them to learn about different religions via, for example, subjects like moral or civic, right? We tell you that it's the only institution where you are explicitly allowed to learn about it. It's the best way. Yes.
When you're confused and still unstable in your formative years, and you're loaded with thoughts and views from both sides that are contradicting, how will that not affect the calculus of thinking for that particular child in the future?
First of all, they're young. They've got plenty of time to sort it all out. We tell that it's good when they're young. So when they get it all sorted out, they're adults. And when they're adults, they have a responsibility back to society. So it's great for them to be confused when they're young and solve it as they grow older, so that they become really, really responsible adults when they're older, right? So that's really good under our paradigm. Secondly, on the third level, now when you remove this, when you give them the ability to pull the children out of certain subjects, right? What's the impact, right? First of all, children are no longer exposed to other things which they don't learn at home, right? For example, if you're only really religious, you don't learn about stuff like creation. You don't learn about atheism and the universe growing and all, because all you learn about is creationism, right? So what are the harms of this, right? You create all forms of discrimination, because just because things are not in line with what you learn at home, principally, you think that it's wrong, and you start to discriminate against people who think differently, right? And this is inherently bad because it destabilizes the country as a whole. All right. Secondly, on how this is a counter narrative within our otherwise indoctrinated societies. In status quo, a lot of their parents want their children to grow up a certain way. If your parents are Christian, they would clearly want the child to be a Christian as well, right? So we tell you that. No, sit down. In homes, all children they will only learn about good principles from Christianity. And why is this really bad, right? Because you only learn one indoctrination, first of all, and that leads to irrationality. And why is this really bad, right? Because you don't think of any other ways to solve a certain problem. And this gets really bad because when you're an adult and you suffer from such a way of thinking, right? What happens is, when, let's just say the government wants to push for something that's beneficially good for the state as a whole, but just because it's not in line with your principles, you decide to go against it, sit down, right? So this is inherently bad because we agree that it's good for everybody, but yet just because it's not in line with what you think is right, for example, your religious views, you reject it. And this is when the state can no longer push for a better society, and this is inherently dangerous, right? But before that, yes?
Look, that isn't exclusive because you're exposed to different views in your environment and in the internet in 2014 also. Why is it so justified and exclusive that you need to force this particular education upon the student?
Look, is the internet a place where you get really, really good information? No, we said that in schools, the Ministry of Education has to, first of all, publish what you learn, right? So basically, we tell you that it's justified, it's really right. You learn things from the internet, they may be inherently wrong. They could be false information, biased information. Well, schools will most of the time only publish, we only teach you education that's definitely right. And therefore, we tell you that the school is the best way, the best place to learn about things because they are most of the time right? And lastly, on how we cannot remove one subject because only a certain part of it is deemed bad or not right for the children, right? Even if they don't concede to our characterization, where we tell you that we are open to ideas of changing the education system to fit, say, maybe more people accepting the said subject, right? We tell you that just because it doesn't really matter, just because, let's just say, moral promotes, say, that the Muslim people in history are the heroes of history, right? We say that, yeah, that maybe one small part is bad, but we can still learn plenty of other principles from moral. They are inherently good. They teach us things like be loyal to the country, be nice to everyone else, don't discriminate and all that. So that doesn't mean, so the conclusive argument, doesn't mean one part of it is wrong, doesn't mean that the whole thing is wrong, and therefore we tell you that we should just change that part of it instead of taking the subject down altogether, right? So what have we told you today? We told you things like how under their paradigm, all you will have are people who have a wide range of discrimination, and also people who only have one way of thinking that doesn't progress a nation forward at all, right? And under our paradigm, we remove that form of discrimination completely, and we have different people integrating society, providing just giving a better future for society. And with that, I'm proud to oppose.
We don't deny that the school education system is teaching students the wrong stuff. We don't deny the fact that the education is actually good. But we have to recognize that to a certain extent is how that education system is being executed. When you force a conservative Christian to learn evolution and force him to accept it down his throat without him realizing, those are when the most pernicious harm happened. Those are when all the discrimination they wanted to talk about would happen when conservative Christians start discriminating secular education. I have two extensions for you today. Firstly, how it improves parental cooperation with the school. And secondly, this is a bigger extension, why it prevents lobby group from doing unnecessary stuff in the future, because education is something that permeates through society. But before I move on, two key issues with rebuttal integrated. Firstly, is it necessary for parents to have this opt-out system to allow their children to actually opt out of the system or not? Ryan was very clear about this, that parents often have views towards their children. Parents often teach children Christianity ever since they are young, or things like science. Sit down, Roshan. I've not started. Ryan told you those kind of things that weren't really responded. But what are the kind of ideas from Kevin that was conflicting towards Ryan's idea? Firstly, he told you about optimum education and why parents are to a certain very extent very controlling towards their children. If Kevin's model here is to talk about optimum education, firstly, let's recognize that parents opt into the system by sending their children towards the school because they trust the school to do the best for their child. But secondly, even if he told you about optimum education, we think that in those circumstances, how determining how optimum it is extremely subjective. You can't learn in the best way possible if you are going against your niche area. If you are being told that creationism is wrong and you're being forced to learn creationism to a certain extent, those kind of ideas are bad. For example, you can't force a person who is bad in maths to actually do maths to a certain extent, to a very complicated degree. But thirdly, We think that parents speculating the school education system and antagonizing the school syllabus and the education system is even worse. Because when parents starts antagonizing and tell you that the education system does not cater to my needs, does not cater to my religious views, those are when the cooperation between parents and school would be even worse. Those are the circumstances where parents would not trust the teachers for their children's education. Those are when parents stop trusting the teachers in what's teaching them in school. But secondly, when they told you, and this was something that they really considered, they considered that parents want their child to be Christians if they are Christians ever since they're young. We think that those kind of ideas are even worse. It's even more harmful when you force evolution down their throat. If the whole family is taught about the value of creationism ever since you're young, you're forcing this into the child, in which the child can't really absorb which is right, which is wrong, and we think that the child would only have conflicting ideas. So the comparison between both sides is this, that your side continuates the harm that parents would have. Parents will continuously antagonize the school system, something our side gives an opt-out to. But secondly, on the issue of education, they told you that it's extremely harmful if students are not exposed to other stuff. And there was a logical gap here when they told you if they are exposed to other stuff, it would prevent discrimination. No, we don't tell you that that is even possible. We tell you that even more discrimination happened under their side. When you see parents in the United States make their children opt out of the school system and opt into homeschooling, it's even worse. When parents go out and say that we are against secularism because secularism is forced down our throats even though we are conservatives. Those kind of rhetorics are even worse, which leads me to my second extension. But furthermore, we tell you, before that, Roshan.
If you respect all religious rights of parents, would you give the parents the right to influence all medical decisions of a child?
If it's principally aligned, then yes. Moving on. They told, onto my first extension, how it improves parental cooperation with the school. Because now let's understand status quo, that parents don't make any choices for the child in school. Without that, if the parents have a conflicting view with the syllabus, they will only speculate that schools are bad. That's when societal perception would change, because society functions on the rhetorics and the ideas that society have. If parents continuously antagonize the school for not catering to their needs, it's even worse for the school and the syllabus, because they're always being antagonized by parents as a whole. We tell you that it's also very harmful when parental associations of school also go against the syllabus, in which there are a large collective group of parents within the community itself. They will start saying that, no, look, we'll shake off the education system because they are not catering to our needs. We tell you that this leads to further lobbying, right? We tell you that in conservative states in United States of America, basically the Republicans always want religious studies to be in school. We tell that when that happens, they always want a more religious education, and they will always lobby for a system like that, which leads me nicely to my second extension. The prevention of lobby groups. Sit down. I've taken from you. I'll take one from opening if they want. The prevention of lobbying groups to prevent from doing unnecessary stuff in the future. So let's recognize lobby groups, right? Because now let's recognize the status quo where let's say you force a religious child to learn science, to learn evolution, and delineate what's evolution and creationism. This gives leeway for lobby groups to actually attack the very syllabus. When they do this, it also means you gives a pedestal for lobby groups to actually influence things of other contexts, right? This is the same scenario we have seen from Middle Eastern states that are very conservative in United States, where the lobby groups go to the extent of opposing the education system, but to a certain extent, because we have to recognize that education permeates society, in which how education is constituted affects how society is function. We tell you that lobby groups will even lobby for other stuff, right? We tell that lobby groups will lobby for abortion laws and ban abortion. We tell you that you have seen lobby groups lobby against LGBT marriage, because they recognize that the school is being too free on the students, the school is being too secular. That's why that's why you see lobby groups trying to attack things from the top, in which they even delegitimize the stances of LGBT. We think that those are even harmful. It's even worse for other sectors, because the progress you can get from education and as well as other sectors is being harmed by these lobby groups. At the end of the day, the lobby groups don't only attack your education system, they attack other parts as well, because they recognize that education has constituted and formed other kind of chain reactions. For all those reasons, go with opening government.
When does the state concede to taking away your ability to choose because it has an inherent benefit to you? This is why in China it is compulsory for you to opt in to have education because the government recognizes there's an inherent benefit in you learning the syllabus that is provided to there. We think that the rebuttals given towards our case were insubstantive and didn't hold very much water in today's debate. But before I move on to how they attacked our case and how they attacked our case and how our points still stand in today's debate, and then I'll move on and I'll integrate my substantives into my rebuttals. Let's look at some of the rebuttals that we have coming towards Kenneth and Ryan's case, right? So they had this whole argument on how you're forcing them down the throat. We're forcing this information that we get, this syllabus down school, down the throat of these conservative children, right? We don't think that's the case. Why so? Because we don't think that we're telling them you have to believe in what we're telling you. You have to believe that evolution exists. We don't think that that's the case. We think we're really telling them you have to concede to the idea that this syllabus exists within society. This particular set of knowledge exists within society. You need to understand that scientifically is believed that humans evolve. We think that these things are legitimate. We think it's right for these children to have this kind of different syllabus and this comparative analysis within status quo, right? We think even if you want to say that it's forcing down the two, we think it's even better because we think that when they're younger, when they're in their formative years, this is especially the time where they need to realize that there's more to the world than their parents are telling them there is. There's more to the world than what their parents want to tell them. There's more than just benefits. That Christianity isn't the only one that provides benefits to you. We think that they need to understand that there are also other forms, other religions, and other methods of thinking that are able to cater towards the kind of beliefs that they have, right? But then they had this whole but then Ryan conceded, right, during a POI, right, that there's outside influence that exists within society. Everyone sit down. There's outside influence that exists within society, right? That eventually that these things are still being propagated from outside, right? We think that they're conceding. There's only a matter of time before they will be able to have this kind of information come to them in that situation, right? We think this leads to two levels of harms, right? First, we think that under their paradigm, that by the time you're able to do this, you may be too old to be able to fully rationalize that maybe that's okay. You'll be too old to be you have a set similar mind under their paradigm when you're not allowed in your formative years to consider the possibility of that being good. You'll only be able to antagonize that kind of belief. So you're not open to them being able to believe it. Not everyone sit down. I'll take one after my rebuttals. On the second level, you will never be able to filter that information. You'll never be able to understand if that information is true, right? We think that at least when you have education, where a platform which is inherently believed to be able, I sit down, I'll take one after my rebuttals. That you'll be able, where education is commonly understood to be able to give you to give you information that is true, right? We think that in this situation, we rather than be able to learn information that's either guaranteed to be true or might be true rather than information that we get on the internet, right? But then they came up with this whole idea on speculation and antagonization towards the school system, that how parents are continuously saying that they're not catering to our needs, you're not catering to what we want. We think in that situation, that's an argument against feasibility. We're fine with them teaching the good stuff. We're fine with them improving the system to cater towards their needs in that situation, right? We're fine with evolving the education system into catering towards their wants as well. We just don't want to have to sacrifice the things that they don't necessarily want to have inside that. We're fine if they want. We're fine if parents are like, why aren't they talking about the good things about Christianity? We're fine if we incorporate that into our syllabus as well. Before I move on, sure, Kenneth.
That your policy or your proposal only happens when children reach the age of majority. As long as the parents are still basically the legal guardian of the children, why can't this choice extend towards the parents themselves, given that they have been assigned that responsibility by the state itself?
Because like I said previously, the state does always enforce certain rules that the parents can't take away, right? I.e., you have to go to school in China because it's inherently realized to be good for you. These kind of situations, right? We think that this is when the state says, okay, yeah, you're the parent, but this is something you need to learn, regardless of whatever your parents think. We think it still applies in this situation, right? So let's look at some of the things that Kevin brought to you that weren't taken down, right? How he talked and how he told you that inherently within these subjects, there's always a reason why the state wants you to learn it, right? if they teach you nationalism in more, right, it's because they want you to be able to forgo all the other differences existing within your country, to be able to accept that that discrimination should not exist in this situation. We think, everyone said I'm not taking anymore. We think that in this situation, this is when we have to recognize that we can't simply ban something simply because we are not principally aligned with it. This is when we need to be able we need to allow children to be able to form their own to eventually form their own rational calculus about it, even if in the meantime even if they may face a period of confusion, even if they may face a period where they're not sure where they stand. We're willing to sacrifice that so that in the future they'll be more open to policies that the government may pass, allowing them basically maybe allowing something that they are not principally aligned with, or so that they'll be able to have a more open idea on towards this and not antagonize other factors within that country, other parties within that country in itself. We think we're willing to push for a government like that, and in society like that. We think our model is the only way to achieve that, right? But let's have a comparative here on outcomes and consequences, right? And which outcomes you want more and which consequences we want more in this situation. No, Kenneth? So let's look at the outcome that we're not you either. On the outcome that we're pushing for, right? On holistic development of individuals in the system, right? And how schools need to always cater for that, regardless of a prejudiced parent, right? No, Ryan or Kenneth, you guys know. But on the second outcome that we want is for society to be more open to perception changes, to be more open towards changes in the system in itself, right? We think our paradigm is the only paradigm that caters towards this. But what's the consequences that we allow from this situation, right? Where we allow for a holistic development of individuals in that system, right? Where we allow them to be able to not only experience the things that their parents choose for them, but also things that they may not be able to experience in otherwise any other platform, right? We say schools, because of the fact that they're mandatory, this is when you'll be able to have a guarantee of expressing things that you may not otherwise be able of getting. We think that we want to push for that. But under their side, where the only outcome that they're pushing for is a society that will be more strict, more straightforward in their principles, and less likely to want to engage in principles propagated by and less likely to want to accept changes within the state and regulations within the state. We don't want to push for a government like that. We want to push for a society which is more moving forward with the world, which caters more towards which wants to push more for societal change that will benefit the society as a whole. Within the side opening opposition has proved to you in today's debate why the school system has to always be holistic in nature, why we can't change the system simply because it doesn't principally align with us.
You don't speak.
Okay. Closing government's debate is going to enter this debate on a very moral ground. We think this debate is about a moral dictation by an invalid actor that should never assume parental rights. This debate is also about what it means to devalue certain lifestyle and lifestyle decisions parents make. This debate is also about the extension of parental responsibility to individuals who are more than rational to make decisions. We are not going to contest that going to those classes will make you more informed. We will contest that it improves your value of life. Because we don't think the value of life is contingent upon information, but more importantly about how the information affects you. I will highlight to you where my positive method is. First, let's talk about what defines comprehensive education. We contest that learning about science makes you a better person. We don't think so. But we must understand the difference. Both sides of the house will indoctrinate children. So their side will indoctrinate state values, this side will indoctrinate parental values. So then the debate becomes, which indoctrination do we want? We on side closing off the government argue to you that we want parental indoctrination. But why so? We think that the reason behind it is simple. Parents are emotionally and communally linked to their child, which means that they are from a certain community. They know what this child has to go through. We think it's sad that certain communities are very religious. But there's nothing a state can do about it. You can't call social service to remove you from a religious space because it's not a wrong one. It might not be one for liberal people, but it's one that's valid nonetheless. So we think parents are more emotionally tied to how this child will react. That's why in Western liberal democracies, if your parents your parent chooses for you, don't want you to have a blood transfer, it's perfectly legitimate. Because your life is going to be defined by your community, not by your overarching state that is insensitive of local values. Second of all, counter narratives. We reject that a counter narrative is even necessary because we think counter narratives can exist when they're older, if it ever is needed. We don't prosecute people for not listening to the other side of the house. We don't prosecute lobbying, like opening talk, but for doing things that are not related to them either. So long as they don't have a third party, we think that's fine. What we also is actively victimize religious communities. We don't understand why that victimization is legit when religious communities don't have it. Third, sit down. What is the right of the government to take? Because she said we take away rights from parents all the time. Look, there's two standards of morality. There are definitive standards of morality, then there are subjective standards of morality. What is definitive? Not killing people and not harming individuals. What is subjective? Everything else is subjective. Which is something that is up to your government, which is elected every 4 years. Your government changes morality every 4 years. Two governments can't agree what is moral. Two states in America can't agree whether it's legal to give people gay rights. We think that no standard of morality is right and wrong. So we don't think the moral actor is your state. Second thing, whether or not this is a legitimate decision on closing conversation. We agree. It might be legitimate to have those classes. So obviously we agree states can take those stances and say we want people to learn all these things. But whether or not to opt into your state is something I should democratically object to. The same way you can consciously object within certain democracies to do this. Your example of China means nothing because you're going to indoctrinate people to monarchy. You're going to indoctrinate people into nationalism. Why is nationalism a value that's more important than being religious to my God? Why is being nationalistic to a government that might not be elected in the manner I voted for more important than salvation? So we don't think that moral representation is right. Three extensions. First, let's talk about moral depletion of invalid. First, we dispute that the morality of governments are the best morality, the best sense of morality to begin with. Why? Because number one, we think that's very subjective whether how governments get elected to begin with. In the United States of America, gerrymandering means that you might get the popular vote, but you're not going to get the government. In a lot of states, even if it's democratically elected, that means with you the majority review. That means to say our government will run on a consensus. But that does not mean, Mr. Speaker, that the population that did not win the election are less valid than another person. What Lawson is directly saying is that if individuals who lost the election lose the moral ground, we think that's harmful to the way discourse in society works. This goes beyond openings, lobbying power. It goes on to the way we treat people in the world, the way we view individuals who are not on the same standard. You also radicalize them to a point where it's no longer okay for me to look at anyone who's a state actor in a manner that is humane and respectful. So we think that's problematic. Second of all, we can be the side and acknowledge their different outcomes. There are four outcomes, of course. A, children will get indoctrinated by the state. B, they will listen to the state, they don't care. Third, their parents will tell them they are going to go to hell and they will have a psychological trauma. Fourth, their parents will be okay. So there are different types of parents that exist in this world. First, if the parents tell them they are going to hell, it is going to psychologically harm the way they move within communities. Within communities, it's not illegal for them to shut you out of churches. It's not illegal for them to tell you you cannot be part of this community because you just sat in that class. It's not about whether you accept it, not whether or not you agree with evolution. The fact that you sat there and listened to another person talk about it is bad enough. Second thing, we think if that you become state drones, what is the value of a religious life? Your state is directly saying that a religious life is an invalid one. We don't want state drones. We think states are elected by people. We think states shouldn't create moral standards. Morality creates states. So we think that's an inverse of what society stands for. Third thing, if most cases, you think children who choose to care. If my parents tell me God is going to send me to hell, I will sit in class being neutral about your education at best. What happens is you have an ineffective system. You think you're changing people, but you're really not. So we think that this course doesn't work. Fourth thing, if your parents are becoming victimized, this is where we think you harm yourselves. And we think it's problematic for the way we have an assumption of power. Look, Mr. Speaker, the government does not run on a constant moral ground. It changes every 4 years, it changes and laws change based on those laws. So how can you tell me it's a concrete standard to make people victims of circumstances? We think you're a victim of the government of that particular time. You're a victim of how lobbying powers work in that particular time. We think there's an unfair standard for children. Yes, Tony.
Your side allows people to pick and choose what they want from schools, but it's ambiguous to denote that children will get all the benefits that are available to school. Why can't we separate them?
It's very simple. We think benefits are only quantified so long as they benefit individuals. No. We think if you want to give evolution's benefit, so we think you can pick and choose government sides. That's why we allow you to opt into welfare, and you don't need to opt into welfare if you don't want to. Because you can pick and choose the parts of government that are very subjective in nature to benefit yourself. We don't think it's an absolutist policy because we think governments are meant to cater to the most amount of people, not certain portions that exclude the are not against the state. These are not people who are against state morals. These are people who are an extension of the state. That's why we think when states decide to delegate the right to parenting, that's why we don't have licensing for parenting, we don't have a standard of what parenting is because it's very simple. The state is, as an entity, has different versions of how life is beautiful. And we think we allow different communities to set a standard for different individuals. It doesn't mean you're creating one population that's better than the other. It means there are different versions of how the state wishes to actualize that. This debate is not about education inside, right? This debate is about morality and who gets to decide what. It's all right for governments to take stances. At what point do you draw the line and say it's an invalid standard to which we treat individuals for? For all those reasons, we think closing government means. Yeah.
Each member of God, and now let me find member of opposition. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, side closing opposition is going to tell you 4 things. Number 1, why parents should not be able to intervene to this particular decision of criteria that we have intervened in the past. Number 2, why you wholesomely use the facilities that have been allocated within schools and why you can't just pick and choose which facilities you want because you benefit from all of them at the end of the day, Mr. Chair. Number 3, how this policy places an undeniable stigma on children as to which are children which of the state and children who are rebelling against the state. And number 4, why you must conform to what the state needs and why consent is never transient in this situation. For that, I have one question to cite closing government. What dictates a comprehensive education system? We have 2 responses. Number 1, we would rather the indoctrination happen in about schools because education, Mr. Speaker, is tailored and decided based on what the people want. So you're going to go into a world with this morality, and the tailor of education is going to set you forward and put you in a life of an adult in that environment and in that community. The state has to do this because they want everyone to get equal opportunities within the state with equal opportunities of jobs. We rather that and sacrifice religion because they don't think about the life you'll opt into after you leave school because parents are very short-term in nature. Secondly, the morality of the government is based on a majority of the view of the people, which means that the state provides an education that is based and tailored on the morality of a majority of people. So when you go into the future, you're going to succumb to repercussions and consequences of the morality that people think is right. So the school education system decides that for you so that you have the ability to understand and live a life within that community or that government that you think morality is insignificant. So you can think all you want, but you will never live in a life where you disagree with people. We want people to live together under the same standard of morality. No, thank you. Let's do our first extension that I have in today's debate. Number 1, why parents should not be able to intervene into this particular choice. We have intervened in parents' decisions so many times because parents' decisions over their children are not absolute. When parents want to place you in dangerous circumstances because they want to build up your attitude as a man, we still don't allow it. When parents don't want to send their children to school because they rather you work in a farm, we still don't allow it. When Jehovah Witnesses don't want a blood transfusion, we still don't allow it, Mr. Chair. It's factually incorrect. Yeah, you should, but it doesn't happen in status quo. Too late. Sit down. Why have we done it and why have we done it? Firstly, there's an overwhelmingly harmful repercussion that is undeniable, permanent and damaging. But secondly, parents' emotions are conflicted and they don't think rationally in these circumstances. Firstly, why is it overwhelmingly harmful? Because we think in these circumstances, like I've told you, this is tailored towards the morality in the future. That's why we want people to get used to the morality that they're often getting into. You would think that they will not be able to live a life after they leave school with perfection. That's why you have to go to school. That's why you don't let your parents abuse you when putting you in dangerous circumstances. Or if parents have incestuous relationships with you because they want to build up your sexual character, it doesn't happen because you recognize the consent of the child. So parents never always get the right over the child. Parents have certain interventions and this is one of them. Secondly, they're emotionally against things. So that means they'll block out any rational argument or any rational idea on whether or not this value should exist within a child. Because they're so entrenched in their own religious beliefs, they will never consider anything else. They will often ignore whatever the state has to offer to them because the state is my enemy. My child should be the enemy of the state as well. Before I move on to my second extension, one POI from closing.
There's an acknowledgement that there are differences. You're able to have constructive discourse to take into consideration differences of people. Why is an imposition the way to get discourse when it leads to radicalization?
Because when you go into the future and you leave school, you're not going to be surrounded with people of your kind.
You're going to be surrounded people with other morals. Often majority of people will be the morals that a state has been voted into. So you're going to live a life with people that have different standards of morality. You have to deal with it. If you want to conform to own your own standard of morality, you need to be in a rational situation to decide when I can lobby for my own rational standard of morality, or when I can decide what is good for my religious community, for example. My second extension, why there's a wholesome use of facilities that you always benefit from. So, Mr. Chair, we have to understand that there are numerous benefits that are not quantifiable from a school. This means the environment that you're in. When you grow up, when you're going to be placed in a situation, or it's a simulation of life in the future, the good friends that you get, education that you get as a person are unquantifiable benefits that we undeniably agree inside closing opposition. What does this side do? This side allows people to pick and choose which portions of school that they want to conform to and ignore the other things. So essentially, you can pick and choose what you want, but you will gain all the numerous benefits at the end of the day you always get. This is unfair, Mr. Chair, because if you want to live in a school, you want to condone and get all the benefits that you can get, you must condone to what the school wants to tell you. We think it's important for that. Lastly, my third extension, why this policy places an undeniable stigma on children. So sure, you can say the stigma is a repercussion that parents have taken into consideration, it's a choice, yada, yada, yada. But irrelevant. It's harms, and harms that we want to mitigate because parents are not in the rational mind to decide. The state will decide for you when you're irrational and you don't have the capacity to decide. What is the environment in school? Sit down. The stigma upon children, because parents always affect their life. If your father was a politician who had an affair, then your life will be pretty shit in school, right? Because you will always be associated as the guy who had a father who was corrupted, who had bad things. In these circumstances, your parents' actions have an immediate and inadequate consequence to the lives of you. This means if your parents tell you that what the school teacher is teaching you is bad, you will undoubtedly be stigmatized by other pockets inside that school. So other children will say, that is the rebel child, that is the child that is not willing to stay with us, and he'll be stigmatized. This is harmful because a child, Mr. Chair, is not able to respond to stigmatization. A child is vulnerable, a child is easily influenced. In these circumstances, the child needs to be protected from stigmas that we always often associate. But secondly, about teachers, your environment in a class, the teachers can pick and choose their behaviors. So if teachers naturally associate themselves with the existing education system because they see as themselves as a unit with one. So naturally, when there's a child who doesn't want to conform to certain parts of the education system, the teacher will not love the child and the teacher will not care about the child. It's very hard for you to place a blame on a teacher because these harms are subjective and hard to pinpoint and hard to solve in these circumstances. My last extension on why you must conform to what the state needs. Why does the state have a legit obligation to do so? 3 reasons. Number 1, these harms of these actions are permanent and damaging. Why is this important? You have 2 inputs, Mr. Chair. One input from your parents who's telling you that it's religious and you must be able to, do things in the name of God. And school telling you that evolution is the way to go, so on and so forth. Our model allows both inputs to come in from the parent as well as the child. So when the child is at the age of 18 and is able to decide for himself, he's able to accurately make a decision for what he wants in his own life. No, that's not what you said, that's what I'm saying. In these circumstances, it's important for a child's consent to not be neglected because under their model, they'll forever be a Christian, they'll forever be a Muslim, or they'll forever be a Hindu, already entrenched in their own religious beliefs. Secondly, you use our resources, you use our benefits, and you benefit from the state. The least you could do is conform to the identity the state wants you to conform to. That's why when you go to a different country and you're not allowed to spank your child because that's against the law, you do that because you're conforming to the laws that the state has. That resources that you use, some benefits that you had. But lastly, consent is never transient. So you always understand that if you opt into a system, you must suffer the repercussions of the entire system. We think it's important. So closing opposition essentially told you that when a child is in these circumstances, a child must be controlled, must be protected, and must be allowed to make his own decisions in the future. But more often than not, this is a legitimate intervention into the decision of a parent, one that we are supremely proud to stand by.
Is this your water?
Whoa.
parents should be able to decide their own kids' education for various reasons, for morality, simply because it's their own way of life, and that is an issue that was never dealt with in today's debate. Now, I'm going to start off by talking about opening opposition's case and taking it down, then by looking at closing opposition's case, and finally talking about the extensions brought forward by closing government. First thing the opening opposition talked about, and first question we need to ask, is whether or not doing this will lead to a beneficial education. Here they talked about counter narratives, they talked about indoctrination, and how this makes people extremists, right? Onto their first point of counter narratives. Firstly, parents won't accept this because in order to do so, they would have to accept the differences and radicalize them, which won't happen. And all they're going to tell their kids that you're going to go to hell, and they're going to victimize their kids. So this is victimizing parents and children. Next, they talk about indoctrination. First of all, your side also indoctrinates them. It's just that in our side, they are better able to work in communities, and your side will only lead them to becoming state drones with no opinion of their own. Next, talk about how this will make people extremists. Firstly, your opposition pushes parents to react in unhealthy ways, such as being more likely to radicalize it as an attack on their religion instead of accepting it, and they're going to be victimizing their kids. Before that, yes.
Why is it that me understanding the different principles of different religions via school equates to my parents saying I'm going to hell?
Firstly, if I'm a Christian and I'm going to go to school and learn about atheism, it doesn't matter whether or not I want to go for the class. It doesn't matter whether I learn anything. The fact is that I was there, I was part of it, and it's going to be seen as an insult to my religion, and my religion, the religious community isn't going to accept it. Moving on. I was talking about how it makes people extremists, right? First of all, parents and communities are going to be destructive anytime after this is going to be destructive when it comes to an open discourse, and this will cause for an inability for any discourse to happen at all. Now, question posed by side closing government, right? What is a good education? It's one that might not be the right one, but defines the community and what they do. It doesn't have to be the state's definition of right, but as long as it relates to the community, then it is the right education. Next question is whether or not the trade-off is legitimate. They talked about how the state has the right to remove this because they want people to have a more informed choice. However, what we think is that the state is discrediting a certain way of life and saying that, you know what, it's wrong to live this way, so we are going to force our morals on you. No, thank you, sit down. Morals that happen to be so subjective and change every 4 years. Next, a more informed choice isn't a more no thank you. A more informed choice isn't a more democratic reflection of community. Like, for example, why do we allow it's the same reason why we allow poor people to vote. It's the same principle, right? A more informed choice isn't a democratic reflection of the people and what the people want. Now that I've taken down side opening opposition's case, let's look at side closing opposition. First of all, they talked about how parents are irrational and take all and are not going to and that the state choosing will benefit them, right? No, hold on. First of all, what determines irrationality? What right does side closing opposition have to say that this is irrational? Parents being able to choose for their kids are irrational. Firstly, being part of a religion is a moral subject and that they are subjected to whatever it is they wish. And secondly, it is rational to have different moral standards. Just because you have a different set of morals doesn't mean that you are irrational. Next, they talked about teachers. No, thank you. They talked about teachers, how they're going to pick and choose certain kids because they follow the class, right, and they are not of a certain religion. First of all, this is so easy to regulate. All you have to do is report the teachers. It's going to be an immediate deterrence because teachers aren't allowed to do this. No, thank you. Next, they talk about a certain state standard, right? Which is irreversible and harmful. Yes, we get that it's irreversible, but what's so harmful about it? Is it wrong to forever remain a Hindu or a Muslim? What's wrong about it? These are legitimate state actors, and these are legitimate state actors who have a right to decide what they want, and the state always changes
changes. We can't rely on a certain set of principles, state principles, and accept it to last forever and expect it to last forever. No, thank you. Okay, next it talks about morality, how it's dictated by state as firstly, morality is something that is dictated by the state as a nation. It is scoped down to communities. Communities, the morality of communities are what form a state, which form a nation, and that is morality. Your side simply assumes that morality is the same. It's not. We're telling you that there are different moral standards that are completely subjective. Hold on. Next, you talked about how people will be able to interact, but before that, yeah.
For your argument to fly, you need to first prove that parental decision is more important than the state decision on how you live your life. But more importantly, what two inputs do you have? And outside, we have a parent who is telling you can eventually decide. Your model makes you a Christian for life.
Yes, and what's wrong with that? Wanting to stay in a certain community for the rest of their life, there is nothing wrong with that. Has it ever occurred to you that some people actually want that life, and then forcing your decisions on them will alienate them from their community, the people that they grew up with? Yeah, I was talking about how people are able to interact, right? No, people won't be able to interact because they are going to view this as an attack on their religion. They're not going to be happy with this, and they're not going to go along with this. Furthermore, they are going to be psychologically harmed when they are forced to listen to this torture and take it in and deal with it every single day. Next, you talked about how the state already limits parents, right? You talked about which is exactly why you talk about how it's exactly why you don't allow Jehovah parents to decide whether or not their kids should take a transfusion, right? Or we tell you that this shouldn't be we shouldn't limit parents this way because it's such an important part of their child's future. The way their child turn out, they should be allowed to do this. So what have we told you from side closing government? We talked to you about the morality and the moral dictation, how this makes people choose to be other parts of society that they want to be, and how morality is very fluid and that there isn't any certain standard of morality. And next, we talked to you about the different types of outcomes and how people will react to this. So for all those reasons, go with side closing government. Thank you.
Yeah. We think that children ultimately deserve the right to education. And it's all right for them to be exposed to other religion, to be exposed to other things for such as sex education. And the schools are able to provide that platform to be exposed. Yeah. However, it is unfair to say that the parents have complete control over on what their children should study and over to how they determine how their children are supposed to live. This side of the house protects closing opposition tells you that in order for us to be exposed and not be able to be exposed and have different opinions, we don't think that the parents should be controlling, because parents sometimes are conservative and there are things that they do not understand. So before I move on to my rebuttals, let's just start off with closing government. So will parents radicalize? So we think that if they do, it's simple, they just go to jail, because these are the kinds of things that if they actually do stupid things, sit down. So they will just be harmed. And second, and on the second response on state drones, because we tell you that doesn't happen, because when you have two sides of the house, you have two inputs. Firstly, your parents telling you, and your state and the state is telling you what to do. So then you have two different opinions, and then you can sit down, and then only you can determine on who is better, and then you can determine that who do you want to follow. Then there's actual democracy and actual rationalization of what you want to be. However, on your side, on side closing government, you only empower
parent roles, right? Where the parent constantly tells you what to do, where the parent is the one controlling your life. We don't think that will happen under our paradigm, because when there are two inputs body, when there are two people telling you two different opinions, then you can make your own different opinion as a whole. Sit down, just started, guys. And so secondly on how other religion will view it as an attack on them. We don't think that it necessarily is, because you're telling that because what you're doing is spreading the other religious culture. That means allowing for the student to understand different cultures. So even then, even if sit down. So even if the religion view it as attack, we don't think that the state can actually do that, can actually help to curb that, because at the end of the day, the state wants to spread their religion, to spread their opinion on different religions. So we don't think that sit down. So we don't think that the other religion will view it as an attack as a whole. So moving on, no, sit down. So moving on to the crux of this debate, right? Is it really false? Because the whole bench is assuming on the idea that that the states are forcing them, the states are making them into drones. However, we don't think so, right? Because we're just giving them education about other subject that is extremely important in life that they have to hold, such as sex education, such as religious. These are the kinds of things that even though they don't seem important, we still think that it's important to gain that knowledge, important to have that opinion towards other education. Because on your side, you empower the indoctrination of parents towards children. You make it seem important that parents are the only one, they're the only arbitrary judgment towards these children. We don't think so, because children ultimately have the right to determine who they want to be, not even if they don't, because is it really wrong? Because what they say is it really wrong to remain Hindu all their life? But the thing is, they can't actually express themselves because their parents, because the fear of going against the parents, because the parents are indoctrinated all their life. You're gonna go to hell if you don't eat curry or things like that. So we tell you that these are kinds of indoctrination that will actually happen under your paradigm. We don't think so. And before I move on, opening.
Sir, if you are so confident with forcing evolution down a conservative throat, are you okay with the state teaching evolution towards the Amish school and the Amish community?
Sir, we don't really think it's forcing. It's merely allowing for children to be able to be exposed to evolution. We don't really think that they need to adopt evolution as a whole. We still think that when you have two sides of the opinion, when you have two sides of the houses telling you different things, then you can garner your own opinion as well. We don't think that it's forced. Sit down. So opening government, right, will lobby change the principle of education. We think that that can happen regardless when parents can also antagonize these kinds of schools, right, as you've said. But we tell you that mainly who are the ones who suffer, where the children are the ones who suffer. Stigmatization, clearly something closing government did not respond to us, where stigmatization will ultimately happen when you're different from the rest of your group, when your parents force you to not take this subject simply because they think that it's right. We don't think that will happen. Sit down. So we don't think that we think that the harms will outweigh the benefits when it happens. So moving on to my next argument. No, sit down. Will parents make the better judgment for the children? We don't think so, because every parents, like you guys considered, that every parents have different opinions. That means they garner different opinions from other people. That means we don't think that parents can make the better judgment simply because when they already indoctrinate their children, when they don't even have that rational mindset to make that decision. So Roshan already told you that where parents can't make that rational decision because suddenly they're overprotective, they're too emotionally connected towards their children. They want what's best for their children, but do they really know what's best for their children? Do they really want their children to be Hindu, even if their children don't like it? We don't think under your paradigm you enforce democracy. We think that you hamper the freedom of the children or the rights to all this, right? So in conclusion to the debate, we think that parents always assume that they know what's best for their children when actually they do not. And secondly, what happens when the state fails the education? We think that it's okay. So if your parents deem that this education system is not good enough, then there's always a choice of homeschooling, right, where the parents just teach them themselves. We don't think there's a harm. But when you
but when the parents already conceded, already subscribed to the education system, we don't think it's fair to just pick and choose which subject you want. Because ultimately, when you already conceded that this education, when the school education is important, you have to follow the rules. Like when in Rome, act like Romans. So these are kinds of, so even then, even if the state has somehow failed the education system, we don't think that the parents have the right to just pick and choose what they want. This side stands for the children as a whole. Back to Oppo.